dadi, our grandmother, was very, very into cricket. This was right around the time of the 1996 World Cup. And so she started teaching her two grandsons the game.
You're talking to three guys here who are pretty much like the most corporate people you'll meet, right? Ashwin and I work for large American firms. DJ is a lawyer.
We found a way to make work just by making it a priority. And by the way, that needs support from family, from spouses, from et cetera, from everybody to understand that, hey, Sunday morning for me, Sunday night for Varun, but it's something we've prioritized, and we're fortunate to, be around people who support that. When we stopped getting obsessed with the numbers and said, would we do this even if nobody listened, and realized the answer was yes, then weirdly enough, the listeners came.
Just buying likes or buying followers, the engagement level is low. Put the episode out there on Facebook and we'd get like 10 likes. We also went through a lot of challenges mentally. They're like, how is this possible?
Podcasting right now is probably where blogging was 20 years ago, because people just want fresh voices, right? And people who are going to call a spade a spade. So if we say that the IPL anthem is copied, which it is, a BCCI contracted guy can't say that.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Yellow Top podcast, where we gain new perspectives, challenge our existing beliefs, and learn life hacks from others to unlock growth for ourselves. I am Sona Mahajan, a mindfulness teacher, life coach, and your partner in personal transformation. Today I'm in conversation with the three founders of Edges and Sledges, India's #1 cricket podcast. I'm really excited about talking to them because they created the podcast as a side hustle, and now even after 130 episodes, they continue to host it alongside their full-time corporate roles. So let me share a little bit about the founders. Ashwin Garg is a senior director with the Gillette business of Procter Gamble. He's worked with them for 11 years and has spent his entire adult life across North America and Canada. Dhananjaya Chak, known as DJ, is a project finance and infra M&A finance lawyer. He works as a senior associate in the London office of the global law firm Herbert Smith Freehills. And Varun Garg. Varun is the head of marketing at American Express in Singapore, and he's worked with them for 13 years. So let's jump right into this conversation. Hi guys, welcome to the podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you. Thanks for making it possible with the different time zones that we're all on.
Oh, no problem, Sonam. Thanks for having us. And yeah, you'll realize with 3 time zones across the world, this is our biggest challenge.
Yes, I can imagine now. Thanks, Ashwin, as well, for joining in.
No, happy to be here. And exactly as Varun said, I think every single week we are grappling with who's available at what time slot, etc. It's a miracle we've been able to have our show for more than 2 years, but hopefully we keep it going.
Yeah, fantastic. 130 episodes.
It's kind of crazy when you say that out loud, actually, to process that we've done this 130 times. So anyway.
Yeah, I'm waiting to get into all of this. And the reason why a conversation with you all was really exciting for me. So in the line of work that I do, this comes up very often, wherein people are searching for their purpose in life, or looking for some kind of meaning, or perhaps even wanting to pursue their passion, becoming an entrepreneur. And there's a lot of buzz around being your own boss, breaking through the corporate shackles, so to speak. The deeper I go with these conversations, and while some of them are, coming from an authentic space of genuinely taking that journey, a lot of it is also a byproduct of the glorified picture that has been painted around having that sense of meaning, purpose, running your own business. And I feel like it's definitely not the entire picture, and hence not very accurate. And then people are chasing that. Secondly, there's this perception that you can either be in a job or you can be doing your own thing. While there are hybrid models, and you guys are a perfect example of that. And I wanted to understand this model that you all have created for yourself. How did you make it possible? So to begin with, if we could talk about what motivated or inspired you guys to start something around cricket. Why cricket? Then, how did it move into becoming a podcast?
Sonam, let me take that question. So it's been a great and very interesting journey. I like the way you described entrepreneurship, but for us, it's been similar to entrepreneurship because it started off as something and it's transpired into completely different from what we started and wanted to do. So in 2014, DJ actually started a blog, and he enjoys writing. So he said, that we spend so much time talking about cricket every day of our life, right? I mean, we're very passionate about sports. I would say it's more passionate than the average cricket fan. And when I say that, I mean, we read about it a lot. We discuss it a lot. All our WhatsApp groups are about it. So we said, hey, there has to be some way for us to channel this passion into just doing something. And we started, we didn't think about how many people will read it. We thought let's just send it to family and friends. 2 years in, we actually got an interesting assignment where a fantasy cricket website actually asked us to write tips for them. And that's when we were like, this seems like a lot of work. They were going to pay us, and we asked Ashwin to join us at that time. So between the three of us during IPL season, which is cricket's biggest season, we started writing. It's been an interesting journey because we started doing something which was also unique, whereas we started traveling to watch cricket and the Indian team. And so in Feb 2018, DJ and I went to South Africa to watch the game. Over there, we realized that with our blog, we've built a Facebook page. We started going Facebook Live and realized that there are people who are tuning in, listening to us, wanting to hear what we have to say. And slowly that kind of just evolved into becoming, when we looked around, we said there are cricket podcasts out there are cricket YouTube channels out there, but it's all done by celebrities. There's nothing specific from an Indian fan's perspective. And so we just delved into it. It seemed like at that time, everyone was starting up into podcasts. And so honestly, the USP of our show is just three guys sitting on a couch watching cricket and the banter that happens with that.
Fantastic. And why cricket? Was that something that all of you all were interested in?
Yeah, it's an interesting background story. So I think a little bit different for all three of us, right? DJ has been an outstanding cricketer. He's one of the best in school. He played at college. He's now, even as an adult, plays club cricket every Sunday. So for him, it was a sport he grew up playing, and he just loved the sport. For Varun and I, it was a little different, right? We spent the first 8 years of my childhood, the first, 11-ish years of his in Singapore, where we actually had almost no exposure to cricket, right? Although, sure, people in Singapore back then watched, we somehow just didn't. And so in 1996, when both of us moved back, our family moved back to Delhi, that's when we started getting into cricket. Our dadi, our grandmother, was very, very into cricket. This was right around the time of the 1996 World Cup. And so she started teaching her two grandsons the game. She said, you can't be Indian living in Delhi and not understand how cricket works. And so she would sit with us through all the games, explain everything. And we got into it there. And I mean, I still don't think, honestly, we were diehard fans immediately, right? It took a few years. And then as we were chatting before we started recording, in 2003, we both left home again, right? We both left Delhi. Varun went to Singapore, I moved to Canada. And as that happened, cricket sort of became a way of the two of us staying in touch. And it sounds strange to say, but when you're a teenager, now, of course, as adults, we're much closer, even outside the sport. But when you're a teenager, we probably needed something in hindsight that was a reason for us to talk, to stay in touch. So every time there was a game, we would be, at the time I would use my phone card from boarding school and call, or we'd be emailing. And then eventually it became smartphones, etc. And so that's kind of the journey for cricket with us. And then you combine it, obviously, Varun and DJ have been very close friends for a long time. That's how that happened. So a very different kind of path into how we got into cricket, but it's the reason all of us are passionate about it. It still stands today.
Fantastic. And it's inspiring that your grandmother got you guys into watching and learning cricket.
Yeah, she was a big fan of the game. In fact, I think in our family, she had three sons herself, and she was the biggest fan of cricket. So when we reached back to New Delhi, like Ashwin said, the World Cup was going on, and it just bothered her a lot that her two grandsons didn't know anything about cricket. So she took it as a mission. She actually taught us the times table that summer and about cricket. So these are the two things.
Well, that's not a story you hear all the time. It's usually the other way around. But yeah, inspiring nevertheless to hear that. Would have been an exciting household to be part of.
It was.
Absolutely.
I mean, for those who remember the 96 Cricket World Cup, it didn't end so well for India, but the actual process for us was great fun.
So now tell me, how do you guys make this possible with work? Was it always meant to be a side hustle? How did you guys look at it when you started working on it?
So it's an interesting one, Sonam. The objective for us was always to keep this as a side hustle, right? You're talking to three guys here who are pretty much like the most corporate people you'll meet, right? Ashwin and I work for large American firms. DJ is a lawyer. And I think part of it comes from the fact that we're so busy in our work day that how can we do something else to fuel the passion outside of work? Mm-hmm. And everyone just sits and watches, but there are very few people who actually do something about their passion. And so it started from that perspective. I think, like I mentioned, we are discussing cricket every day. So I think the key thing for us is that it doesn't feel like work. Mm. And so the biggest challenge for us is really, how do the three of us find the time to record? We've just kind of blocked it now in our calendars. Every Sunday, 10 p.m. Singapore time at night, we get together, rain or shine, we figure it out. It's been such a passion project that all three of us have pre-COVID had a lot of travel plans. And we've taken it from all sorts of different locations. In fact, I've taken I've recorded a podcast. Ashwin and DJ forced me to record a podcast at the airport at 7:15 in the morning, catching a flight to Kuala Lumpur while my boss was sitting next to me. So it's just something that we push each other to do. It's something that is it's a passion project for us. And honestly, like Ashwin mentioned, it's a chance for the three of us to get together and speak every week.
So you described it effortlessly, Varun, but I'm pretty sure it's not as easy, right? When you talk about consistency and what you just described, that's probably just one of the incidents. How do you work through it? What showed up in terms of real challenges as you were juggling this?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say a few, right? One, we've mentioned the time zone already, but it's not easy to take lightly, right? There's probably a 3-hour window every day when both Varun and I are awake. That happens to be on a weekday during the time DJ is right in the middle of his workday. So there's obviously the logistics, the scheduling part of it, etc., that we find a way to make work just by making it a priority. And by the way, that needs support from family, from spouses, from etc., from everybody to understand that, hey, Sunday morning for me, Sunday night for Varun, that's normal. That is normally family time or normal, but it's something we've prioritized, and we're fortunate to, be around people who support that. I think the second is kind of the more when you hit this mental roadblock, so let's say it's a quiet week in the world of cricket and you don't exactly know what you're going to say, and you've been working 60 hours at work that week, and you just want to not deal with it, and you don't want to power through and deliver the podcast that your listeners are expecting. And there's kind of two things that have evolved for us. The first, I think Varun mentioned it, but I'll reemphasize, is we have so much fun doing this. And there have been opportunities for us to tweak, like people have asked us to invest in different projects or to provide to become the content provider for different platforms, et cetera, that we have walked away from at this point. And the reason for that, we've done a lot, but we've also said no to a lot. And the reason for that is, I think all three of us know deep down, the day this stops being fun, we probably we won't do it anymore. And so just from a mindset, mental health standpoint, we are messaging each other 30 minutes before we record about how excited we are to talk about the topic. When it ends, inevitably 30 minutes later, one of us will message on our WhatsApp group saying, man, I can't believe you said that. And this is just part of what makes it entertaining and fun and energizing for us. So it's almost a source of energy versus a drain of energy now. That balance can shift anytime, and I think we're aware of it, but we're all proactively investing to do that. And so, by the way, for the first 50 episodes of our show, we only recorded with all three of us, at least. Right. And we sort of had a realization then that, hey, when you have three hosts, it's okay if one person's having a week where they're not ready, either logistically, physically, or mentally. And so now we try our best to have all three, but if there's a week where only two are available, we'll invite a guest or something else, and we make that work because we want to be doing this for the long haul.
And to be honest, when we started, just to add to Ashwin's point, when we started, I think, we started with this being a lot of fun. And then you start thinking, like any corporate people, what are the numbers? How many people are listening to us? And at that point, podcast didn't really give us great data analysis. So we had to keep going. We saw some listeners, we saw people starting to engage with us. I think that has driven us the most, right? I think for us to be able to put out a podcast every Monday evening, and from Tuesday morning onwards, have people engage with us on Twitter, have people tell us that, this section was great, or you guys are doing a great job, or you guys are my Monday morning drive. Those things really are the driving factor for us to continue doing this. In fact, I recently got trolled as well on Twitter, and that was not something I was expecting. So that's the downsides of dealing with this as well. But yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to you. So long as you're having fun and you're engaging fans or people or the listeners, I think that's what drives it.
I mean, to your point, Ashwin, I think what you mentioned, leveraging the team's strength, I think is fantastic that you guys have that, bandwidth to play with. And thanks for sharing what you did, Varun. That brings me to the point wherein when you begin, you don't see that traction and you don't see the numbers. How was that? Did you guys face that journey, or was it a quick growth for y'all? And if you kind of had that slow growth that many people, tend to experience, how did you work through that?
Yeah, I think, it was probably a little bit of up and down, and Varun, jump in if my memory's failing me. But early on, we had probably a reasonable spike, just probably because of family and friends and word spreading that way. And the truth is, after 5 or 7, 10 episodes, your family and friends who aren't passionate about the subject, they drop off, right? They stop listening. Early on, they want to support you. That's great, but I'm not going to do this every week if I don't really engage with the content. And then we went through a while, probably where there was a little bit of a lull. By the way, our format evolved a lot, right? We started doing video. So we started releasing the videos on YouTube of all of us. There were some graphics, etc. Then we upgraded our audio technology. We quickly pivoted from being like a Facebook chat that was happening once a week to being an audio only podcast. And again, you have to remember the spring of 2018, audio only podcasts were not really a thing in the India market, right? They just didn't even really exist. And so when we quickly made that pivot, then we started to see a little bit of a spike again. But I think the key is when we realized, we get together and talk about this. If some people listen, that's awesome. If they don't, that's fine too. We were going to get together and chat about the show anyway. And when that realization happened, we were able to stop getting obsessed with the listener numbers, focus on great content. And it's always the irony of life, because that content we created became more organic, became more fun, became more lighthearted and natural. And that led to more listeners. And as Varun said, that's what people tune in to listen to us for. Like, the number one piece of feedback or review we get on our show is, it feels like I'm chatting with my college buddies, or it feels like I'm, with my friends talking about this week's match or the cricket. And to us, that's success, because that's what we set out to create, because exactly as Varun said earlier, nobody was doing that. So when we stopped getting obsessed with the numbers and said, would we do this even if nobody listened, and realized the answer was yes, then weirdly enough, the listeners came.
And I just want to add, Sonam, that we also went through our ups and downs, right? And I'll bring up 2 points. One is, I spoke about the money we made through a fantasy website that we were writing for. We actually are not looking at this to make money or, support our income through this side project. So we took all that money and pumped it into doing Facebook ads. And in a way, we built our Facebook engagement to 100,000 followers, right, on our website. But when we started realizing that when you're just buying likes or buying followers, the engagement level is low. So initially, when we started out and we were putting out this podcast, and we're like boasting about we have 100,000 followers, and then we'd put the episode out there on Facebook and we'd get like 10 likes. We also went through a lot of challenges mentally. They're like, how is this possible? And it's been a journey since then, right? Because we essentially then pivoted to Twitter, and we realized that having 3,000 followers on Twitter who are truly engaged with us is much better than having 100,000 fans on Facebook. So it's been a journey of ups and downs.
And when you talk about it not having that intention or the pressure to generate revenue, I look at it as a hybrid model, and it's great because you guys get to pursue your passion and do something fun, and it's fulfilling, aside of work. So it meets a certain need for each one of you. There's a lot of pressure again around my passion must make money, and in this case, how do you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in quickly before Varun shares his point of view. I will say, I mean, when you did your setup or the intro, you talked a lot about how, like, being my own boss and having my passion project and making that into my life is important. And I think that's true. And I think you're talking to 3 guys in their early to mid 30s who have all worked corporate jobs for their whole career. And none of us have that significant itch to be our own boss and chase our passion, or quit our jobs and chase our passion, et cetera. And probably a big driver of that is that we are able to, quote unquote, scratch that itch or check that box for ourselves via this side project. So that means it's probably added work, right? But I mean, no entrepreneur who pursues their passion as their career says they work less, right? Everybody works hard. Everybody's hustling. And so I think this has been interesting for us, where we, our 9 to 5s pay the bills, they deliver professional satisfaction. And I can't speak for DJ, but I know Varun and I, we like our jobs. We're, motivated to do it. It's a part of life that we're driven by, but it's one part of life, and it's not all of life. And it's very clearly not the only thing we do. And then this allows us to be our own bosses, to make our own decisions, to do things we want to do for fun. By the way, we both work in marketing. So we're always trying out fun marketing things with the podcast, with the blog, that, maybe the companies we work for are too big to do in our day jobs, right? So there's a few of those things that basically it allows you to get that element of satisfaction, chasing your passion, pursuing your hobby, being your own boss, while not doing it as your only or as your primary career.
Yeah. And to add to that, I think, very honestly, there's no pressure on us, right? Because we're not looking to make money off this. It's still fun. And so we don't take that pressure on ourselves. We actually, when we started this off and we started making some money through revenue in US ads that Ashwin was being able to get, we said, hey, this is going to be our beer money for when we meet. And so it was sitting in Ashwin's account. We met during the 2019 World Cup in the UK, and Ashwin bought all the drinks because the beer money was sitting in his account. So it felt like there was no pressure. We did this to be able to collect some money, to be able to have a good time when the 3 of us are together. Just to share a little bit more about that, we actually were making a decent amount of money at one stage. And Ashwin and DJ had the headache of editing this podcast every Sunday night. So honestly, I'll put my hand up and say I didn't edit the episode even once. And at 11 p.m. when the podcast was done, Singapore time, I would go to sleep. But for the next 8 hours, both these guys were awake and they had to edit. And that started becoming a little bit of a headache, right? Because you started putting pressure on yourself to deliver this every week. It was supposed to be fun. And it just so happened for us that IVM podcast, which is a huge podcast distribution network, called up DJ and said, we've actually been following your podcast. There is a gap in our podcast portfolio for a fun cricket related podcast, which is run by fans, which is what the three of us are. And so they called us. And the minute they had that call, Ashwin, DJ, and I actually got on a call. And we said, hey guys, let's talk about this. I think there's two things to discuss. One is they said they're going to take a share of our revenue. But the second thing is they said they're going to edit it for us. And I remember being the first one to say, guys, you are taking all the effort and doing the editing. The money is not important for us right now. Let's sign with them, get the editing headache off you, and let's ensure that this stays something that we enjoy doing.
Yeah, and that's great, right? You're kind of aligning, and that awareness is there around what is important. And I think I'm hearing a lot of clarity in various aspects, right? And you guys have been kind of taking your decisions, carving the path out for the podcast accordingly. So that's fantastic to hear. Do you look at it as a side hustle going forward as well? How do you guys look at it in terms of its growth and in terms of each of your roles in it?
Yeah, so I think somewhere down the line, the dream maybe in 10, 15 years is to be able to do something related to cricket full time. Whether that's the podcast, whether that's something more than the podcast. I know personally for me, that is something that I would love to do, right? But in the meantime, I think this is how we want to run it. We do want to grow the podcast. We want to ensure we're reaching out to new listeners. I think personally for me, I would love to see this podcast get into certain partnerships, whether that's with big websites like crickinfo.com or CrickBuzz. It could be with an IPL specific team, like all of us follow the Delhi Capitals. For me, I think my aspiration for the podcast is for us to be able to tag on to one of these big players and become a part of their marketing, social media engagement, fan engagement base. And that's really where I would love to see it, because I think in that what will happen is two things. It'll give us a little bit more purpose to be able to continue to doing this full time. It'll maintain that fun element because we'll do it a little bit on our terms. And I think the third point is we'll probably end up learning a lot from cricket gurus, right? I think the key thing for us is none of us claim to be experts on the game, which we are not. We are just fans of the game. And so I think if we can learn a little bit, get a big name and grow the podcast, I think that's where my personal aspiration.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think, Varun, you said it right. I think the only other thing that's been very inspiring to us is I can probably name 5 cricket podcasts that have started since we started. And many of them reached out to us to understand our journey, understand not like the technical side, how do you record mic, et cetera, but also, a little bit about the content, et cetera. And so as you think about that, that's another thing for us, right? Like it sounds very counterintuitive. We don't benefit by being the only cricket podcast that's available to people. We benefit by there being a lot and us being the best. And so that's what's interesting is like, we love when there are new podcasts that show up. We like being guests on their show. They come on ours, and we want podcasting to become a bigger medium of information gathering for cricket fans, which it's growing today, but it's still not the biggest, right? It's still largely video. India is still largely a video market between YouTube and then, from Crickinfo to CrickBuzz to all the big sites, they're constantly releasing video content. There is, Spotify has invested very large in India in the market. So anyway, all that to say, we want to see the podcasting market, especially for cricket, continue to grow, not just in India, but among kind of the NRI communities around the world. And that benefit, that's a huge driver for us as well.
Fantastic. So taking a step back, if I were to ask you a little bit of a broader question, what would a meaningful life look like for you? I know you guys have crafted this model for yourself, and I also hear that there's a lot of awareness, a lot of clarity in terms of how you want to live your life. Tell me, what would a meaningful life look like for you, looking back a few years from now?
Yeah, I mean, if I was to give like an overall all-rounded answer on what I think a meaningful life is for me, I think I want to definitely continue to do well at work. And by that, I mean, grow in my job, learn every day in my job. I enjoy the people management or mentorship. So from a work perspective, I'd love to continue doing that. But at the same time, I'd like to maintain a work-life balance. I want to be able to spend time with family and friends. I think relationships drive me a lot, right? They're what motivates me. And so I think relationships with all close family and friends, old or new, building new relationships would be important. And then the third would be something that kind of fuels my passion. And for me, whether I like it or not, cricket is a passion. So whether it's watching cricket, whether it's playing cricket, whether it's growing this podcast, transforming this podcast into something else, I think I'd always want that little bit of cricket in my life in some shape or form.
Yeah, what I think is interesting about what you just said, Varun, is relationships and your third one, which is your passion, are so intertwined, right? And if you think about why this podcast became a thing, is between the two of us and then all your friends, etc. That was an important part of how this became a thing, basically, right? So I think it's very interesting to think about that way. I mean, I think Varun answered it really well. I think for me, the only thing I'd say slightly differently maybe is it is always important to have that balance and have those kind of different sources of energy, right? And so professional ambition, career, wanting to do well is one. And part of the reason I've stayed at the same company for as long is because I feel they value those of us who have exciting things going on outside of the workplace, right? There are some workplaces that want you to work 80 hours and give 100% of your life to it. And there's some that realize people are their best when they have things outside of work that they're excited about. And so our mom always used to say, the more you do, the more you can do. And it's kind of that idea, right? Like when you are just working and then coming home and watching Netflix on evenings and weekends and not engaging with your friends or family and not pursuing hobbies or playing sports or activities, then your life goes by that way. And when you realize, hey, I can do different things every evening and spend time with my family and stay connected to friends and family abroad and pursue a sport, we were talking about this, but keep playing music and doing all these things that are exciting to you, then you're much more high energy and motivated for your job, for your time with your kids and your family, etc. And so I think the more people internalize that, the more you realize there are enough hours in the day for most people. Now, we're very privileged to have jobs that allow that to us, and I recognize that not everybody has that. But for those who do, there are probably ways you can, balance that out, and that's what we've been chasing.
I love that take, Ashwin. Thank you for sharing. Closing thoughts, any words of wisdom that you'd like to share?
No, I mean, I would just say, I think for anyone out there who thinks that it's tough to have a side hustle, it's not. I think it's important to be able to find something you're passionate about. I think the most important thing is to keep it fun and keep it alive, keep it fun, keep trying different things, and just start somewhere, right? It doesn't have to be a podcast. Anything that you're passionate about, try to do something on the side. Just be consistent. I think for us, that worked as the biggest factor. We just made sure we did not miss a single week. And yeah, I would say it's very fulfilling once it gets off the ground.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Varun just said. The only thing I would add is we get so caught up sometimes in chasing a specific goal or a specific number or this idea, even as you said, that like, hey, I'm passionate about this, I have to do this full time. And it's important to step back and say, why am I driven by being my own boss? Why am I driven by saying I want to pursue my hobby as my career, etc.? And when you understand that, there may be many, many, many different paths to the end goal. And if your path is like us, hey, maintain your professional career, do your 9 to 5, and then invest your free time and passion in a side hustle, that's great. And if your path does say you need to quit your job and pursue it full time, that's fine too. But don't jump into that because you're seeing others do it or you're hearing or it's the latest thing. Just take the time to ask yourself, what am I looking for and why? And you may get to a different path than you originally envisioned.
Thank you. Very, very important. I think in today's times, there's a lot of noise and just tuning within to see what works for us as individuals. Thank you so much, Varun, Ashwin. We miss DJ. Fantastic conversation. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of insights and takeaways from this.
Thank you, and good luck with the rest of your show.
Thank you, DJ. Thank you for making this possible.
No, thank you, Sonam. I'm really sorry. I had it in my diary, and I think the guy spoke about scheduling challenges, right? So you've seen a real life example of it. I had it in my diary as 8 p.m. India time, but it turned out to be 8 p.m. Singapore time. So I logged on 2.5 hours later, only to find you guys had recorded and were done. So thank you for making the time again to chat with us.
Absolutely, no problem.
Yeah, I'm actually called the podcast PA, so this is quite funny that I'm actually goofed on the scheduling.
Great. Okay. So DJ, I spoke with the guys about this, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on, how do you make this possible? And all of y'all have full-time corporate roles. You're a lawyer. How do you manage, working the podcast, India's #1 cricket podcast? How do you run this alongside a full-time corporate role?
So just to add to that, firstly, I found out yesterday we are number one in Finland and Kuwait also. So just wanted to put that out there, which is pretty
Fantastic.
funny. I don't know who's listening to us in Finland, but on a more serious note, it's a passion project for us, right? And it's something we do every week, but we do it on the weekend. So often our jobs require us to work on the weekends, but I mean, it's okay, I think, to take out half an hour, 1 hour from your week to just chat about something you love. It helps us keep in touch with the game. And frankly, over the last 2 years that we've been doing it, we've watched so much cricket. We read so much about cricket. It's an outlet to just chat about it with two like-minded guys. And we have a great community of listeners who obviously follow the game as closely as us and are constantly writing in with news, writing in with topics to chat about what we think about this, what we think about that. And it's a really interesting model that it's come up. It's almost a highly engaged listenership model, and that actually fuels us. And I think the guy spoke about that as well, saying whenever they get feedback on the podcast, it fuels them to do better. And I think that's what keeps us going. I mean, just the people actually listening to us. And because it can be a lonely place, podcasting, because you're kind of just speaking into a mic and you don't know who's listening there. But putting those names to faces or Twitter handles to questions it's just incredible for us. We just love it.
And I think this came up quite a bit, right? The fun element for you guys is something that drives all of you in doing this, and some of the decisions have been, based on the fact that this must continue to be fun. But tell me, I mean, for you, have you faced any challenges apart from, of course, scheduling is one? What else did you see yourself having to work through? Because again, consistency isn't easy. You're delivering something week on week.
Yeah, so there is a challenge on maintaining the quality, right, of the podcast, because if your listeners have come to expect a certain level, it is a challenge. We do need to prepare. I mean, I say we record half an hour every week, but I'm usually, or one of us would usually put together the topics for the week, the flow of the podcast for the week. One of us would have to host the podcast and make sure that it goes to time. One of us needs to schedule the podcast. I'm often playing cricket in the summer on Sundays, so I'm in a random part of England with no phone signal and things. So I think those are the challenges as well. We've recorded from, as Varun and Ashwin said, we've recorded from all sorts of random places. I've been in Peru doing the Inca Trail while we've recorded. Ashwin's been in China. Varun's been in an airport, in a taxi. He's been in all sorts of places that we forced him to record in. But I think the challenge is keeping our listenership engaged, really, I would say. And that means that the content has to be good, because they will pick you up very quickly if your content isn't good, if you haven't kept an eye on a domestic player that's doing really well. Because it's easy to focus on India international stuff, but people want to hear more. They want you to go beyond what is on television, beyond what is on cricket, for which with our full-time jobs can be super challenging. But I think we've grown as well, and so the content, I think, has improved. So if you go back to perhaps the first few episodes, the content as well as the presentation is quite different.
I'm sure there's a learning curve with respect to that. What helped you through this? There's probably a bunch of things that you need to do prior to hitting that record button.
Yeah, so one, I think all of us kind of know what our roles are on the podcast. There's no one jostling to be the exclusive host, or the guy who wants to do the topics, or the guy who wants to talk about this. There's an ease with which all of us have kind of slipped into our roles. As a lawyer, I'm naturally attuned, I suppose, to trying to organize things and make sure that the scheduling works. The topics are in bullet points. We've got the show notes done. So we write our own show notes as well, unlike the other IVM podcasts, because I felt that our show notes need to be more informative. Whatever we've talked about, we need to make sure that that information is in the show notes so people can actually cross-refer to it when they're listening to the podcast. So that has really helped on that front. And I mean, they're just an easy bunch of guys to get on with. And you can count on them to do the podcast every week, which I think it's a huge challenge with three people, right? Like at least two of us will be on every podcast. I think we've had one podcast where there's been one of us because the other two were completely unavailable. And there we had a guest. So it was okay. We've had, I think what's also helped is podcasting right now is probably where blogging was 20 years ago. So podcasters are happy to help each other out, which I'm not sure blogging anymore is. Again, these guys mentioned it, that We want podcasting to grow. We want more podcasters to be out there. That's been really helpful. So if we don't have one of us available, we usually go out and ask one of the other guys who run a podcast, would you like to be on a podcast and chat? So recently we did our own IPL preview, which was, I think, 85 minutes or 90 minutes split over 2 episodes. But we also sat down for an hour and a half at one shot with an English cricket podcast called The Cricket Badger. Ashwin and I put in an hour and a half of our working day just chatting to him for his podcast, which didn't even show up on our podcast, right? So it's that kind of collegiate atmosphere that exists in podcasting at the moment, which has been helpful.
So tell me, what's your vision, DJ, with respect to the podcast? Is this something that you look at as a side hustle going forward as well?
So when you say side hustle, I wonder what that actually means, because does that mean that you're trying to make some money off it? Because sadly, there's no money in podcasting. Hopefully there will be one day. I'd call it a passion project more than a side hustle. It's, again, these guys spoke about it so many times. They're just like, the moment it becomes work, we don't want to do it, because if it becomes a full-time job, or it becomes like, I have to deliver this on this day. Like right now we can say I'm taking a break for a week, and we've done that in the past where it's got really intense. Like last year after the IPL, we had the World Cup coming straight up, and frankly I think a lot of us were burnt out by the end of the IPL, just keeping up with the 60 odd games that they have in the IPL, because we had to pick out the highlights and people want to listen to what the big performances were. So we said we're going to take a break, and frankly even that 1 week off just refreshes you, and then you're looking forward to that next week. So we put out 130 episodes. But we have taken a couple of breaks in the middle, just at strategic times, to make sure that we are charged for the upcoming IPL or the upcoming World Cup or whatever it is. And right now, the vision for the podcast is, I think, just to keep growing the podcast as it is, get more listeners, get people more involved. We've started a listener campaign during the IPL, so we'll have some of our more regular listeners coming onto the podcast, which is, I think, really nice. I mean, I would have loved to do that if there was a podcast that I listen to and I could be invited on as a guest. So it's just coming up with more and more interesting ways to keep people involved. We started a Discord community where people can come and chat about cricket, send in news. It's a little bit like Twitter, but more private, right? And eventually, I don't know, maybe, as Varun said, maybe 20, 30 years later, we've got a little while to run in our corporate careers, fingers crossed, but actually do something full-time in cricket, contribute in some little way. I'm not saying write a book or make a movie, but it'd be cool to be part of the cricket community. But I think in some way what we've benefited from is not being part of the establishment and not being part of the commentary team, or not being, because people just want fresh voices, right? And people who are going to call a spade a spade. So if we say that the IPL anthem is copied, which it is, a BCCI contracted guy can't say that. So I'd say we want to be that alternative voice and keep growing that alternative voice in the world of cricket as a fan's perspective.
Yeah, I'm sure the fans appreciate that. DJ, if I were, again, I asked the guys this as well, taking a step back in what you've described to me, right? How do you view a meaningful life? What's an expression of that meaningful life look like for you?
It's quite a tough question, because it makes you think about what you value in life. And often I think, what if I win the lottery tomorrow? What am I going to do with all that money? And at the end of the day, I just want to be with family and friends having a good time. I mean, it doesn't matter how much money you have to do that, right? So I think a meaningful life is being able to have that time to spend with your family and friends while being successful at what you do and enjoying that as well. So it's finding that perfect work-life balance. I think work is a big part of how we all identify ourselves. Work, it's not the only way we identify ourselves, of course, but it's a big part of it. And enjoying what we do, being successful at what we do, while enjoying the company of our loved ones, I think that would be a perfect definition of a meaningful life for me. Contributing to society, giving your time to kind of worthy causes, I think is also important. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think you've thrown me a little bit with that question, but I think that's my initial reaction to it.
No, thank you for taking that. It is a deep question. Yeah, I should have pre-warned you on that one. Thanks, DJ. No, it was really fun. Thanks for giving me your thoughts and insights and take on your journey with the podcast.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. And
thank you all for watching. Hope this was fun, useful, and insightful for you. I'd love to hear your feedback or anything else you'd like to share in the comment section below. If you haven't, please do subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to not miss our next video. Take care and be well. I'll see you next week.